Okay, good morning. Let's get started. I'm going to talk today at the end about pushing for peace. A couple comments. There is a Jerusalem Post is live streaming a conference as we're sitting here right now. You can go watch that at jpost.com. I think it'll eventually be up on YouTube, but for now you can watch the live stream. It's a little bit hard to find, but just look around the page there at jpost.com, and I think you can find the link to it. About 4:30, 5 o'clock this afternoon, Caroline Glick will be doing the final talk of the conference. She was, as I walked in here, she was doing a panel on BDS, moderating a panel on BDS. So that, I think it'd be very interesting and informative for you to watch that if you are so inclined. We talk each week about the convergence of events, and you know, when I look at things, this week seemed, in some respects, it seemed a little less intense than past weeks, but in some respects, it was just as intense as the past weeks have been, because there's really a lot going on, and it's a little bit difficult to sift through everything and know what's worth sharing with you. So I thought today, I don't talk very much about the economic news, just because everybody would be really mad at me for being too negative then. But I will probably cover that in the future. But I thought I would share some things this week that came to my attention in the category that I would call technocracy. A man who has spoken in front of a lot of us named Patrick Wood has a website or a blog site called Technocracy News. I'd highly recommend that you follow that. As you know, in one of the little panels down here, we have a little section for technocracy. And it was about, it's been 5 years ago that Time magazine on its cover it said 2045, the year man becomes immortal. Now, a lot of people think, well, that's just science fiction talk. But this is really what a lot of people believe. And Ray Kurzweil, an inventor and technocratist, I guess you would call him, or technocrat, is very involved in this and thinks that man will be able to become immortal by 2045. In fact, he's now revised that to about 2030 because technology is advancing so quickly. The important part of that was that this is very much like the Tower of Babel, where people thought that they could become like God. And they don't need God, because we are gods. I mean, this is the lie from the beginning that Satan has tried to put in everybody's head, that you can become as God. And you don't need a Savior, you don't need Jesus, and you don't need God because you are your own God. The interesting thing about that cover was that it was mainstream. This was not some fringe element. And now Kurzweil is a consultant or employee of Google, one of the largest technology companies in the world. So when these people do these things, you need to take note. And a lot of times, things are what we would call the Trojan horse. They seem like very good ideas. Now, I don't know exactly what the mark of the beast is. It does say that it's coming in the 70th week. There will be a mark by which you will have to buy or sell. There's a lot of speculation about that. And then if it is, and I'm just saying, if it is, has the technology of a computer chip, an RFID chip of some kind, it will be a good idea, because what is a big problem for technology companies today? Identity theft. And so if there was some way to bring that technology to make it unique to one person, that may play into it. But they're not just looking at chips anymore. Remember, it was a tattoo, then it was barcodes, and then it's a chip. But they're going beyond that now. This was in the New York Times just last week. Scientists talked privately about creating a synthetic human genome. And this is the New York Times a week ago yesterday. And they're talking about redoing the genome. Now, a lot of this sounds good, like who wouldn't like to be able to have a body that doesn't get arthritis or some other disease? And maybe they can improve us through altering the genetic code. But this has huge implications, theological and ethical implications, that a lot of people don't talk about. And given the state of the world right now, with these breakdowns in traditional morality and that sort of thing, I'm not optimistic that this will be used just for good. But I'm doing a panel for some attorneys soon on cybersecurity. And I know from my own personal experience, I mean, how many of you have all those little, frequent buyer cards? And pretty soon you have 100 of these things, and your wallet is this thick, and you can't get it in your pocket. And it'd be, sometimes I think, boy, it'd be great to just, scan my hand and let me go and have it all in one place. So these are good ideas, but people will use them for bad. Now, when people were confronted about this particular conference that Harvard University sponsored, they said, oh, you're misinterpreting. It's really not. We're not going to do it for bad. We're not going to try to. It's just for research purposes. And we're doing every animal. We want to do every animal, not just humans. Well, that bothers me probably a little bit more that they have these expansive plans to mess with everything. So that's just something to keep in mind. And they have the technology to do this. Now, I personally believe that there are limitations on man that God has kind of built into the system, that he will not be able to go that far, or he will intervene before they get too far. But that doesn't mean they're not going to try. And I think what they'll find as they continue to break into the genome, that it's much more complicated than they even thought, because it was designed by an infinite God. So that's just, but it's something to look on. This is a article that just came out. Best-selling historian says the promise of AI, artificial intelligence, means the rise of a useless class of humans. Well, now, in a world where Europe and some states in the United States are allowing euthanasia on demand, and where we have abortion on demand, where if a child is inconvenient to you and you decide to terminate your pregnancy and end the life of the child, where do you think this type of reality will lead? They're going to say, we're going to get rid of people because you're just not worth it. This is interesting. I personally have liked, I don't watch it too much anymore, but the show Person of Interest on CBS. And it's interesting, but it's very dark and frightening when you think about it. And then this article came out this week. A new surveillance system from Purdue University may let cops use all of the cameras everywhere. And again, it's one of those things, well, wouldn't it be great if the cops could catch these people who do bad things? But you know that the tendency is that it never stops there. So it's just a couple things to keep in mind. The upcoming election, we have almost 6 months to go before the election takes place. I think that a number of discussion groups on Facebook will melt down by then. Actually just turned a molten mess because it's very heated. Everybody's got an opinion and a place to express it now, and there seems to be no brakes on it. But one of the issues that will be very important in the election is what's going to happen with the Supreme Court. Because some of those justices are getting pretty old. I'm sure that I'm confident that all of the genome and other technology if a Republican was elected president, they will apply all of that to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I mean, they'll be wheeling her into court in a cryogenic chamber to get her to vote on cases. But this week was yet another example of the importance of the election, at least in the issue of the Supreme Court. The case came up on, it was essentially the Little Sisters of the Poor case, and a bunch of colleges that said they did not want to enact certain contraception policies as required by the Obama administration because it violated our religious conscience on contraceptions or abortion. And the Obama administration essentially said, we don't care about what your religion is. This isn't anything to do about your religion. You pay for it anyway. So they had a case, and it came up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court sent it down to the lower court for further consideration. Why? Because the vote was going to be 4-4. It was going to be no decision. And this is what's going to happen in case after case after case until they get that ninth, because the court's deeply divided. And right now, on a lot of things, it's going to be 4-4. And so that's why it's an important election. There are judges out there that are taking stands. Judge Roy Moore, of course, he's been suspended for taking a stand against same-sex marriage. Again, this is the second time it's happened to him from the Alabama Disciplinary Council. The Obama administration, by the way, I don't know if you've been following the case down in Texas, where the Obama administration, they asked for an extension of time. And the judge asked the lawyers for the Department of Justice, if I give you this extension of time, are you still going to be processing these immigrants? And they said, oh, we have no intention of doing that. Guess what? They lied to the court. They lied. And they did 100,000, at least, people that they processed, even after they said, well, we have no intention of doing that. And the judges come down pretty hard on them in that case and ordered the Department of Justice to put in a special ethics training program for their lawyers. But, and they're saying, we're not sure that Attorney General Lynch, somebody said I made a little mistake last week, called Bruce Gender. I have not made the mistake of calling Loretta Lynch Loretta Winch. But now that people have suggested it and planted that in my mind, I may actually make that step. But they said she's not involved in it, but it's just it's a problem in the Department of Justice. In this case, they've lied to the court over and over and over again. And as a lawyer, that's really not a successful career path to take. But thus far, they've pretty much got away with it, and that case is now up in the Supreme Court. But guess what? It's probably going to be a 4-4 decision unless something changes. But this contraception thing, this was not a victory. I saw a lot of conservative pundits saying, oh, we had a great victory in the Supreme Court. This was not a victory. This was, they dropped back and punted. That's not a victory. This article, few obstacles found to lifting military's transgender ban. And celebrating in another article that the United States Army is now, for the first time in history, under the control or being directed by an openly gay man. This is having a major impact on the readiness of the United States Armed Forces to engage in a battle. Our planes, I mean, I see this on all sorts of, the planes are in bad shape. They're cannibalizing. They've even, for B-1 bombers to fly, they had to go to museums and pull parts out of the B-1 bombers that are on display in a museum so they can get the plane in the air. I think there was one place where they had like 45 fighter jets, and 24 of them were being used for parts to keep 21 of them in the air. And this is true, and I've talked to a retired Air Force general a lot lately, and he says this is exactly true. The Air Force is in its worst state of readiness since World War II. Our troop levels are down. The people are overtaxed. They've had multiple engagements in combat theaters, and they're worn out, and they're not being replaced, and it's a problem. And sometimes I wonder, and I see Russia kind of a little bit on the ascent with some of the technology that they're using, the new missiles that they have out, some of their submarines, and you wonder if, I think I speculated on this before, if our president isn't like a plant to do what they want. I mean, I asked myself, what would he have done if he was a plant? What would he have done differently? That's the question that I would ask. And I don't have anything to put on my list of that he could have done differently. Well, in response to this transgender thing, Robert George, a professor at Princeton, at least for the time being, wrote this on his Twitter account: with Obama's bathroom edict, the right of parents to direct the upbringing and education of children is in graver peril than ever. Vouchers. And then and another one that he tweeted at the same time: there are few superstitious beliefs as absurd as the idea that a woman can be trapped in a man's body, but in the age of feeling, you can do anything. It's a perfect example. Now, a defense authorization bill came up for vote in the House the other day, and the Democrats, an LGBT activist congressman from New York, proposed an amendment that would require the Defense Department not to use any contractors or anybody that might discriminate on the basis of LGBT issues, like if it's a religious corporation or religious institution or anything. And so that came up for a vote, and you see here that it says here, time remaining 0. This is from C-SPAN. And here's that, well, I'll let this play while I read, well, here, I need to read what's going on. Hang on a second here. The defense bill says that religious businesses, associations, and institutions receiving federal contracts cannot be discriminated against on the basis of religion. By Friday morning, New York Democratic Representative Sean Patrick Maloney, an openly gay member of Congress, proposed a similar amendment to the defense bill. Maloney's amendment would have prohibited funds to go to any business contractor who did not comply with President Obama's executive order banning federal contractors from discriminating against LGBT personnel. So as the vote came up, you can see here, and I've kind of sped it up a little bit, the time remaining, it was going to pass. That amendment to the defense authorization bill was actually going to pass. And the time expired, and you can see here the votes are changing. After time expired, now it's 214 yay, now it's 213, 212. And the Democrats see what's going on because the Republicans are back there twisting arms of their members to change. And they're yelling, shame, shame, shame. And then you'll see here what happens in a second. Oh, there it goes. It changed, and they defeated it. Well, that...
On this vote, the ayes are 212 and ayes are 213. The amendment is not adopted.
Mr. Speaker, I want to raise a parliamentary inquiry initially with reference to the fact that Mr. Ryan, our Speaker, has told us if people were in the well, that the vote would be held open. I was standing in the well. No one came, or no one had the courage to come into the well to change their vote. But notwithstanding that, the vote kept changing.
It happens. And they lost, and they're not happy about it. The congressman, by the way, to Steny Hoyer is the guy speaking. He's the minority whip in the House. And the Congressman Maloney from New York is there to his right. And it was defeated by one vote. There were 30 Republicans that voted for it. You can probably look it up in the congressional record as to who those Republicans are. This is a blog from the Huffington Post the other day. And I only say it for the purpose of showing that this will not stop. It's like the floodgates have been opened. Now, to us it seems totally crazy, but the person who wrote this claims to be a Christian. And she said, and she concluded her article, her name is Susan DeWitt Hall, and she's upset that Christians are upset that she wrote this. And she said this, concluding, in his person and in his salvific actions, Jesus is truly the first and forever trans man. Now, I'm not going to go through and read all the nonsense. If you want to go look it up yourself and read it, I'm not going to put the link in the show description. But this, we talked a little bit last week about Romans chapter 1, that God, it's a judgment of God. He gives them over to a reprobate mind, and they lose the ability to reason. And we're seeing that day by day more and more and more. And at this point, there's the so-called tipping point. I think we're well past the tipping point. And I don't know that it can be turned around. I suppose it's theoretically possible, but I don't see it happening. In England, the Archbishop of Canterbury said that you should not speak about your faith unless you're asked to. By the way, I believe, I can't remember this guy's name. I believe that he was associated for a time with Holy Trinity Brompton. That is Nicky Gumbel's organization that has put out the Alpha Course. The Alpha Course is very popular in evangelical circles, even conservative evangelical circles. It is, I would say, very charismatic in its orientation. And people who've read it, Sandy Simpson's done some great work on this over at Deception in the Church. I'm just saying this is an outgrowth of, I believe, people who follow the Alpha Course. Don't share your faith unless asked. So how would that have worked through, so Agrippa, okay, Paul standing in front of King Agrippa, you think he would have asked? But Paul shared anyway, right? And he almost persuaded him to become a Christian. And this is the head of the Church of England that does this. Doesn't make any sense. Okay, well now I'm going to turn to the Middle East and some things going on there, because there was kind of been a major shakeup in the government of Israel, and I think it has some implications. I think you'll see why I titled this Pushing for Peace. But just to start this off, Islamic State has issued a threat that they will engage in war with Israel across the globe. What does that mean? They're coming after the Jews. Okay? Now, do you think they're going to stop with Jews? Or do you think the Christians are also involved? Now, I know that some friends of mine, and they're very optimistic that an Ezekiel 38 war and a Psalm 83 war will eradicate Islam. And we won't have to worry about Islam. Nobody will have to worry about Islam anymore. I don't see that happening. One of the reasons for that is that those wars seem to be, in some respects, centered in the Middle East. And while they may defeat large chunks of Islamic countries, I believe that more than half of Muslims live outside the Middle East. The largest population of Muslims in the world, in a country, is Indonesia. And this week, this was reported from Foreign Policy, that ISIS is getting kids from Indonesia, taking them to Syria and Iraq, and training them. They're calling them the cubs of the caliphate, to kill for the cause. Now, I have a video here. There's no sound to it. This is al-Baghdadi, but you can see that they are training these children in these camps to be Islamic fighters. And these are kids. This is like Boy Scouts. And you can go through, and the translation of this is it's heartbreaking and frightening all at the same time. The children wear camo, they practice martial arts, they fire handguns and rifles in sync as a proud instructor looks on. They burn their Indonesian passports in a crackling bonfire. The film shows young Indonesian and Malaysian men dressed in combat fatigues and vests, jabbing AK-47 assault rifles into the air, while a crowd of the children joins them in chanting the takbir in Arabic, an expression of faith in Islam. And they say this: while the cubs of the caliphate prepare themselves to be the conquering heroes in the near future, their fathers never stop waging jihad in the battlefields and being garrisoned on the front lines to expand the territory of the caliphate and protect every inch of this land. Whoever did not brand the polytheists as infidels or doubts their disbelief or corrects their creed then has become an infidel, a young child says. An example is those who have not branded the Jews and the Christians as infidels. And then you'll see a thing here at the end of this video clip where they actually take their passports, they throw them into a pile, and then set them on fire, because they are swearing the allegiance to the caliphate. Now, a lot of people, when you talked about this, demographics of Islam, would say, well, Indonesia is very moderate. But I know from talking to people at Moriel that there has been severe persecution and burning of churches in Indonesia. It's pretty far away. It just doesn't make the news that much, but it is an issue. So this is why I think that this Islamic thing is part of however this thing plays out in the end times. I don't think it's going away. Now, I hope I'm wrong, okay, and I've been wrong before. I heard you singing, I think you were singing Happy Birthday to my wife, right? So, by the way, sidebar on that. I love my wife. She's a great lady. One time I asked my mother-in-law, I said, so, did you have any problems with Pam growing up? And she said, oh, yes. She loved chiclets, little gum. And she would eat them all the time. And to protect the supply, I put them all the way up in the top cabinet in the kitchen. And then I went up to get some one day, and they were all gone. And that little girl, 3 years old or whatever, had crawled up the cabinets like a ladder and gotten the chiclets. And I really had to give her a whaling. And I'm like, so is that all you got? Yeah, it's pretty much all I got, you know. So she's a very unique individual. So back to jihad. So last week I talked a little bit about Sykes-Picot and the fact that there's a lot of controversy among geopolitical historians and people that look at geography of the world and politics and all that as to whether Sykes-Picot caused the problem or it was just a further attempt to deal with the problem that existed in the Middle East. The Middle East has always been a difficult area because it's very tribal. The rise of Islam there probably only increased the intensity of the conflicts. We talked about how it was done by Sykes and Picot. Sykes, a British general. When ISIS came into being back in April of 2015, al-Baghdadi, it's only like a little over a year ago, at least when al-Baghdadi said this, that they wanted to undo Sykes-Picot. So that's where their focus is, but it has shaped a lot of the things that have been going on in the Middle East since. I'm going to play just a little clip from the American Enterprise Institute, Michael Rubin, talking about the development of Sykes-Picot. It's interesting, I think it's good historical background.
100 years ago, World War I was raging. At the height of the conflict, the British and the French met secretly in order to divvy up the spoils in the Middle East after the war would end. This became known as the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and we're about to mark its 100th anniversary. Today, when we look at the Middle East and we see so many problems, many people suggest if it weren't for that Sykes-Picot Agreement, if it weren't for the imperial drawing of new borders and boundaries, the Middle East might be a very different place. All of this begs the question, what if the Middle East borders were redrawn? There's all numbers of ways in which this could have been done. So what if the borders were drawn on ethnic lines? Everyone remembers the story of Lawrence of Arabia and his great Arab revolt. He had promised the Arabs a state, and you know, many of the Arabs expected a single state for all the Arabs in the region. It was Sykes-Picot that dashed those hopes, as well as conflicting promises to others. However, are all Arabs the same? In 1952, Gamal Abdel Nasser overthrew the Egyptian monarchy, and Egypt became the seat of hotbed Arab nationalism. That's the idea that the Arabs should have a single state, and many of the borders and boundaries should be erased. Did it really work? Well, Egypt tried to unify with Syria, but frankly, the cultural and political differences between Egypt and Syria were just too much. Likewise, at various points in time, Jordan and Iraq tried to unify, and that didn't work. If you go across the Arab world, from Casablanca to Cairo, and from Baghdad to Beirut, many of the Arabs in the various states can't even understand each other's dialects. There's that much difference. If there's one thing in the Middle East, no one is defined by one variable. No one's simply just an Arab, or just a Jew, or just a Shiite, or just a member of this tribe, or just a member of that family. Everyone has a much more complex identity, and it can lead to a rapid division of any polity based solely on ethnicity. So what if the Middle East borders were drawn on the basis of religion? You got the three big monotheistic religions in the region. You got Judaism, you got Christianity, and you got Islam. But who speaks for each? And when it comes to Islam, we all hear about the divisions between the Sunnis and the Shiites, and those divisions don't seem to be coming to a conclusion anytime soon. If you're going to divide states on the basis of religion, well, first of all, what happens to the minorities in any of those religious states? Are they going to have any rights whatsoever, or do they have to move? In effect, would we have a new round of sectarian cleansing? Just think about the Islamic State for a moment. They killed the Shiites, enslaved the Yazidis, and sent the Christians packing. Is that really what the rest of the Middle East wants? One of the other problems with dividing the Middle East on the basis of religion goes back to the confluence of geography and history. One valley could belong to one minority, another valley could belong to another, and the third one could belong to the first minority all over again. So to draw these borders just on the basis of religion would be very difficult. What if the Middle East borders were redrawn on geographic lines? Is there any natural way to do it? First of all, most of the population of the Middle East lives along the coast or they live along rivers. And so what you have when you go across the broad swath of the Middle East are very heavy concentrations of population, followed by hundreds of miles of very little. So let's think about these population centers. You have the Nile River and you have the Fertile Crescent. Well, that's Egypt and Iraq right there. You have the Mediterranean coast. Well, that's Israel, the Palestinian territories, Lebanon, and Syria. Then you have all the states that exist in the Persian Gulf. Oman, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. Could there be some redivisions there? Absolutely. Here's the thing. If you were going to redraw the borders based on geographic grounds, they'd probably end up looking not dissimilar to what we have now, where you have states surrounding the population centers, and then you have borders drawn somewhere out in the desert simply to divide one from another. What about all those people who say that the states of the Middle East are artificial? Well, to some extent that could have been true 100 years ago, but is it really the case today? 100 years is a long time, and Jordanians, Iraqis, Egyptians, Saudis, Lebanese, they've all developed unique identities. Even if you were to redraw the borders, would those identities that are based on 100 years of common history, of literature, of language, of TV shows, really go away? The answer to that is probably not. When people study the Middle East, let alone live there, it's hard to emerge optimistic. After all, this is a region with myriad problems that always seem to be on the verge of boiling over. But if the past 100 years have taught us anything, it's that there probably isn't any magic formula. So should the Middle East have new borders? Should a century of Sykes-Picot be put in the dustbin of history?
Well, that's the question. So there's a lot of controversy about it. There was a good article in the Jerusalem Post this week talking about this, and it talked about the fact of some of the things that were surrounding Sykes-Picot or shortly thereafter. The status of Palestine was to be determined at a later stage with the Zionist factor specifically to be taken into consideration. And that's where Mark Sykes' role comes into play. Sykes was one of those committed Christian Zionists who saw the reestablishment of a national home for the Jewish people in its ancient homeland a moral and historical obligation, a sentiment shared at the time by another British Zionist named Winston Churchill, who in 1949, criticizing the anti-Semitic Ernest Bevan's adamant refusal to recognize the new state of Israel. Yes, there were anti-Semites in the British Labour Party then too, though to countervail this, there are also many friends of the Jewish people in Zionism, like Richard Crossman and others, declared in the House of Commons, this is Churchill, Israel's statehood marked an event in world history to be viewed in the perspective, not a generation or a century, but in the perspective of 1,000, 2,000, or even 3,000 years. Needless to say that Sykes, in addition to his moral and historical leanings, was also motivated by his belief that Jews, especially in America, which had not yet entered war, could make an important political contribution to victory over Germany and its allies, as well as by the expectation that once the war was won, the Jewish presence in Palestine would act as a natural mainstay of British interests in the region. This indeed was also the position of the Zionist movement led by Chaim Weizmann, and Sykes' attitude had a significant impact on the Balfour Declaration 1 year later, though Sykes by then had died. The original Sykes-Picot Agreement was reconfirmed at the 1920 San Remo Conference, incorporating on Britain's insistence that the Balfour Declaration, without, however, drawing final borders, including those between the Galilee and the Golan. By the way, that San Remo Conference, there's a French lawyer who's written extensively on this. That is really the only time the world body agreed on how this thing should be divided up. Now, they want to ignore that now, but in terms of international law, that's probably the operative conference document that came out of the San Remo Conference in 1920. Needless to say, the Zionist movement had laid claim to all the land up to the Litani River, now in Lebanon, and to the sources of the River Jordan. That would be up, like, say, around Tel Dan and what we would call biblically Caesarea Philippi, and to the sources of the River Jordan. But while the border of Palestine was eventually extended northward, mainly as a result of the Jewish settlements in what is now called the Galilee Salient, the Litani River, most of the Golan, excluding the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee and the Banyas River, remained French and later Syrian or Lebanese until the Six-Day War in 1967. On the downside, it must be admitted that in creating the artificial states of Iraq, Syria, and to some extent Jordan, the Sykes-Picot Agreement can also be blamed for the present mayhem in the Middle East and, in consequence, many of the dangers facing Europe and the rest of the world today. And those dangers are real. This was just in Israeli Times of Israel this morning. The Iranian commander says we can destroy Israel in under 8 minutes. Now, I bring this up because we know that there is coming some kind of an agreement, some kind of peace agreement. There's a lot of opposition to that in Israel. Caroline Glick wrote her book, The Israeli Solution, One-State Solution in the Middle East. A view with, if I was thinking solely without any relation to Bible prophecy, it's a view that I personally like, because I think it solves the but it doesn't end the disputes. But I would support Israel in taking that stand. Because, Israel, when they talk about that, they say, well, they allow Arabs to live and function in their society now. It's the Palestinians that say, you have to get all Jews out of our territory. They're the ones who want to eradicate Jews, not the other way around. That gets lost. But these lines are drawn, and it's a central core issue in the world. Now, there was an interview with the Pope in a French magazine this week. He's asked a question this. On April 16th, you made a powerful gesture by bringing back refugees from Lesbos to Rome. However, and he criticized Trump for the wall, right? And so the Vatican has walls that are 40 to, 150 feet tall. Did he tear down the walls of the Vatican? No. And he brought back, what, a couple families maybe? So it says, however, does Europe have the capacity to accept so many migrants? And this is what the Pope says. Now, when you listen to this, you'll know what his real religion is. And here's a hint. It's not Christianity. It's a political movement. And it's not on the right, so you try to figure it out. Pope Francis, that is a fair and responsible question because one cannot open the gates wide unreasonably. However, the deeper question is why there are so many migrants now. When I went to Lampedusa 3 years ago, this phenomenon had already started. The initial problems are the wars in the Middle East and in Africa, as well as the underdevelopment of the African continent, which causes hunger. If there are wars, it is because there exist arms manufacturers which can be justified for defensive purposes, and above all, arms traffickers. If there is so much unemployment, it is because of a lack of investment capable of providing employment, of which Africa has such a great need. More generally, this raises the question of a world economic system that has descended into the idolatry of money. He was just talking about money, wasn't he? The great majority of humanity's wealth has fallen into the hands of a minority of the population. Completely free market does not work. Markets in themselves are good, but they also require a fulcrum, a third party, or a state, run by somebody like me who's really smart, that's what the subtext is, to monitor and balance them. In other words, what is needed is a social market economy. That's why Bernie Sanders got an invite. Coming back to the migrant issue, the worst form of welcome is to ghettoize them. On the contrary, it is necessary to integrate them. In Brussels, the terrorists were Belgians, children of migrants, but they grew up in a ghetto. This integration is all the more necessary today, since, as a result of a selfish search for well-being, Europe is experiencing the grave problem of a declining birth rate. It sounds like you watched maybe one of my updates. A demographic emptiness is developing. In France, at least, this trend is less marked because of family-oriented policies. In your view, is the fear that this religion sparks in Europe justified? Pope Francis. Today, I don't think there is a fear of Islam as much, but of ISIS and its war of conquest. This is the language of the left. And I can pull out Rob Bell's sermons where he says the same thing, which is partly drawn from Islam. It is true that the idea of conquest is inherent in the soul of Islam. However, it is also possible to interpret the objective in Matthew's gospel, where Jesus sends his disciples to all nations, in terms of the same idea of conquest. What religion is he? I can tell you what he's not. Today, I don't think there is a fear of Islam as such, but of ISIS and its war of conquest, which is partly drawn from Islam. It is true that the idea of conquest is inherent in the soul of Islam. However, I just read that, sorry. That sounded familiar. But he says it's possible to interpret Jesus the same way. Listen, you want a definition of like false religion, apostasy, whatever, that's it. In the face of Islamic terrorism, it would therefore be better to question ourselves about the way an overly Western model of democracy has been exported to countries such as Iraq, where a strong government previously existed. Like, a dictator that ground people up in trash disposal things. Or in Libya, where a tribal structure exists. We cannot advance without taking these cultures into account. As a Libyan said recently, we used to have one Gaddafi, now we have 50. Ultimately, coexistence between Christians and Muslims is still possible. I come from a country where they cohabit on good terms. Muslims come to venerate the Virgin Mary and St. George. Similarly, they tell me that for the Jubilee year, Muslims in one African country formed a long queue at the cathedral to enter through the holy door and pray to the Virgin Mary. Now, this is what some Bible prophecy teachers have been saying for a long time that Mary's kind of maybe the entry-level drug to this one world religion thing. This is the Pope saying it is. So all the criticism heaped on people like Dave Hunt and Roger Oakland and others who have observed this over time, people need to apologize to them because they were wrong, because this is exactly how has played out. It is playing out right in front of our eyes. Now, in light of all this, Caroline Glick had an article about a week ago called Time for a New Israeli Diplomatic Initiative. I'm going to share a little bit of that and then some of the things going on in Israel politically, because I want to kind of set the stage for it. So Caroline wrote a couple columns week before last Sunday, in which she talked about, I think it was on her Facebook page, she was concerned about comments that were being made by the IDF commanders, some of the IDF commanders, saying that Israel in some respects was like Nazi Germany. This is from the IDF commander. And there was a lot of people really upset about that, Caroline being one of them. And so she wrote this very, I think, well thought out column a week ago, Tuesday or Wednesday, called Time for a New Israeli Diplomatic Initiative. And I may have alluded to this a little bit last week, but I don't think I read from it. In a week or two, Israel will again be the focus of a well-dressed international lynch mob, according to the news report. So listen, you want to hear something like this live, go listen to her around 4:30 or so today at the jpost.com, the live stream of the JPost conference in New York City. According to news reports, U.S. President Barack Obama intends to use the so-called Middle East Quartet, comprised of the U.S., the UN, Russia, and the EU, as a tool to ratchet up Western condemnation of the Jewish state. The report is expected to include even more expansive assaults on Israel for refusing to deny Jews our civil rights in Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria. That's what they call today the West Bank. The mountains, really the mountain spine of Israel. It's the area that Abraham occupied when he came into Canaan. It will likely ratchet up the false claims. You got me? Okay. It will likely ratchet up the false claims that have already been made to the effect that Jewish cities, towns, and neighborhoods and homes beyond the 1949 armistice lines are illegal and a threat to world peace. The Quartet statement will also brutalize Israel for lawfully destroying illegal construction projects undertaken by the EU in Judea, Samaria, and Jerusalem. And the EU's been doing this. They've been funding it, and Israel says, you're not going to do that. They tear it down. The EU engages in illegal building in order to subvert Israel's rule of law and enfeeble the IDF. Around the same time that Obama has scheduled his newest assault on Israel, France is expected to convene a so-called peace conference. That's been moved to June 3rd, I think a week from Friday, because John Kerry was busy this week. The stated purpose of the conference is to restart the fraudulent peace process, which the Palestinians killed nearly 16 years ago and have never agreed to resuscitate. The novel aspect of the French conference, which neither Israel nor its Palestinian diplomats will attend, is that other than the misleading headlines referring to their powwow as a peace conference, the French are making no effort to hide that the sole purpose of their initiative is to condemn Israel. The purpose of the conference is to provide diplomatic cover for the French government to recognize a state called Palestine. When then French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius announced the conference in January, he said that whether or not the conference leads to peace, France will recognize Palestine. And just to be clear, the Palestine France intends to recognize will be located in land controlled by Israel and to which Israel has a valid claim of sovereignty. This is, you see the world putting the pressure on Israel to divide the land. This is very prophetic, I think. In the face of the approaching international onslaught, thought leaders, leaders and politicians on the left insist that Israel must act. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, they argue, must participate in the Paris conference, and he must announce an initiative now to vacate Judea and Samaria or to stop allowing Jews to exercise their legal right to build homes in these areas and in Jerusalem. But its initiative should be acquisitive rather than self-destructive. It should be based on actual rights, not on mythical wrongs. To this end, Israel, this is her solution, should announce that given the Palestinians' rejection of the rationale of land for peace, which stands at the root of the long-defunct peace process, and given the absence of any Palestinian constituency that supports the two-state formula under which a Palestinian state will live at peace with the Jewish state, Israel no longer believes it is possible to effectively govern Judea and Samaria through a military government. And so she says, we just need to put a stop to it. And we need to declare a one-state solution. Now, there was a dispute that developed this week between Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, and Moshe Yaalon, the defense minister. They're both from the Likud party. And what happened was when the IDF commanders made these, what some people consider to be outrageous, inappropriate standards, Yaalon, who was a great soldier, somebody said he was a great soldier, a great defense minister, and a lousy politician. He went and supported the IDF guys. So Netanyahu called him in to his office and put him on the carpet. That was about Monday or Tuesday of last week, right after the Independence Day celebrations. By Tuesday, they were coming out and saying that everything had been resolved. Our rift over the IDF comments has been settled, and that the army is subordinate to the government. Now, move to Wednesday. This was the front page of the Jerusalem Post. The Egyptian president calls on Israelis, Palestinians to take historic steps to peace. And he gave a speech, I think it was in Eilat, or it was in Egypt, in which he said that, look, we did this 40 years ago. We made peace with Israel. It's time for other people to make peace too. And there's been a big push from other Arab governments that now's the time to peace. That's why I called the beginning of this thing pushing for peace. And there were reports, Arab governments call for peace. And so the front page of the Jerusalem Post, which is fairly moderate to right publication, said, could Sisi help birth a unity government? Because the Israeli government is very, very divided. And they're very divided over how they approach what everybody calls the two-state solution. So here's what it says. Egyptian President al-Sisi could follow in the traditions of the mother and sisters of Moses. This is from the article in the Jerusalem Post, who were midwives in ancient Egypt by helping give birth to a national unity government in Israel, sources in the Likud and Labor said Tuesday. By the way, in Britain, sidebar comment, the Midwives Association, is head by a lady, said that we should allow abortion and killing of infants all the way up until the time of birth. So that's a different midwife than the Jerusalem Post is talking about here. Likud and labor officials were thankful to Sisi for aiding the effort to build a new. So Likud is the right-leaning party of Netanyahu. The labor is the left-wing party. They were thankful to Sisi for aiding the effort to build a new government, both behind the scenes and in a speech he made Tuesday, in which he stated his commitment to contributing toward the Israeli-Palestinian peace effort. The officials confirmed a Channel 10 report that if a unity government is formed, Prime Minister Netanyahu and Labor Party head Isaac Herzog could go to Egypt to launch a new peace initiative under Sisi's guidance. So what do we see? We're seeing a continuing push for that two-state solution, the attempt to make peace. Now, there are a couple frameworks for that. There's the Quartet framework that exists, and there was this article in the same newspaper, the same edition, Quartet report on Middle East peace still behind decline. So there's the U.S., the UN, Russia, and the EU. They're the Quartet. And they've built upon other supposed frameworks for peace, like the Oslo Accords. And a couple months ago, I played you videos of what took place on the White House lawn in September of 1993 about this. That's when Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat shook hands. Bill Clinton sort of helped them along a little bit. And some people think, I think, that the Oslo Accords could be the agreement that gets confirmed or made stronger to start the 70th week. That's my speculation. We'll see what happens. I don't know that it is. But as I said, there are many potential peace agreements that could be confirmed and strengthened to start this. So Israel, this article about the Quartet, Israel fears the Quartet report will include the harsh language on its settlement activity that in years past has been softened by the U.S. Past presidential administrators have argued that public rebukes of Israel are counterproductive to trust building in the pursuit of peace. But the Obama administration believes that a tough love approach is necessary with the government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, which it does not believe is genuinely committed to the establishment of a Palestinian state. But the reports are Netanyahu is willing to go to Egypt to work on this. In principle, the Obama administration supports Peretz efforts to bring some 20 countries, the Israelis and Palestinians not included. So the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu's not going is not his fault because he wasn't invited. They didn't invite the Palestinians either to a conference about how to have peace between Israel and Palestine. Because why? Because the nations of the world are gathering together to divide up the land. That's what it says in Zechariah, Joel. And I don't think it's happened on this scale ever before, this push for peace, pushing for peace and dividing the land. Israel opposes the entire initiative, which included a French-authored resolution presented to the UN Security Council outlining international parameters for an end to the conflict. UN proposals on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict are opposed by both leading U.S. presidential candidates as efforts to impose from without a solution that should be directly negotiated by the parties themselves, but the Obama administration has reserved the option of supporting UN action. We're very concerned about trends on the ground, and we do have a sense of urgency about the two-state solution, State Department spokesman John Kirby told the Post last month when he asked about a separate Palestinian-led initiative making its way to the Security Council. He said, "We will consider all of our options for advancing our shared objective of lasting peace between Israelis and Palestinians, but I'm not going to comment on a draft Security Council resolution." I think I played you that clip, actually. In speaking with a French radio station on Tuesday, French President Hollande said, this initiative is necessary because if nothing happens, if there is no strong French initiative, then colonization attacks, terrorist attacks, and several conflicts are going to continue. He also voiced regret about a resolution passed by the UN cultural body UNESCO last month that failed to acknowledge Jewish ties to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. That was an unfortunate amendment put forward by the Jordanians, which they still voted for. Hollande said of the decision, which concerns the site known to the Muslims as Haram al-Sharif or the Al-Aqsa compound. The resolution only used the Arabic terms for the site. I promise to be extremely vigilant when the next resolution is put forward in October. I will look at it personally. It's not possible to call into question the fact that these holy sites belong to three religions. Over the weekend, France's foreign minister said on a visit to Israel that he expects the Quartet report to be published by May 25, so sometime this week. We'll see. William Langfan, an attorney who lives in Florida, a pro-Israel guy, wrote a letter to the French foreign minister, and it says this, kind of interesting. "I feel that I have the right to respectfully ask you to read the PLO original 1964 charter, which called for the destruction of Israel when Israel was within her 1967 borders. Please study Article 24, which says this organization does not exercise any regional sovereignty over the West Bank in the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan on the Gaza Strip." So the PLO, when it came in, it says, we don't have any authority over these areas. Now everybody wants to give them authority over those areas. It actually says its activities will be on the national popular level. This is what the PLO would do. In the liberational, organizational, political, and financial fields. Mr. Langfan says this. He's 94 years old. "I am prepared to give Wells Fargo $250,000 check to you. Are the first person who presents a document validly voted by the Palestinian National Council, which lists the alleged annulments of the charter and which contains the new language of the alleged partially annulled clauses." And he goes on to lay out what those clauses. And he concludes his letter with this. "As you are aware of the fact that the other two political Palestinian parties, Hamas and Fatah, also have a charter and constitution calling for the destruction of Israel." Do you know that, Mr. Foreign Minister of France? Have you ever read any of the Memory and Palestinian Media Watch recent frequent exact translations of Palestinian TV, newspaper articles, Palestinian leaders' speeches, and clergy's Friday sermons? Now, this whole Palestinian thing is, it's made up. This was an interesting thing that happened this week. This is the new Palestinian Museum in Israel. It was supposed to open this past week. It didn't. They didn't have anything to put in it. So I'm just saying, I think it's an art museum, but if it was a history museum, it would be as empty in 10 years as it is now, okay? I'm just stating facts. It's kind of an interesting thing. Well, so Yalon came out, he talked about this, and then things deteriorated further between Yalon and Netanyahu. Netanyahu issued a statement condemning the IDF commanders. Yalon did not like that, and he came out and he resigned. He quit the Likud party. He left the Knesset. He'll be replaced in the Knesset by Rabbi Yehuda Glick, the Temple Mount activist who was almost shot and killed. By most estimates, it's a miracle that he survived. He will become the new member of the Knesset because he's the next on their list to put in the place of Yalon, who's quit. He's left the party, and so the Likud says, look, this is what the headline was. I think this is Thursday in the Jerusalem Post. Peace Initiative will refute Yalon's claim of extremism, because what Yalon said was the Likud's being taken over by extremists, the government's being taken over by extremists like Naftali Bennett, who actually, a horror of horrors, lives in the area that they call the West Bank. He lives in Judea, Samaria area. And this is unacceptable. The article continued, said, Prime Minister Netanyahu intends to embark on a major diplomatic effort to disprove outgoing Defense Minister Moshe Yalon's accusations that under his premiership, Israel and the Likud party are toward the extreme right, senior Likud sources said Saturday night. Netanyahu said Friday there is a great diplomatic opportunity on the horizon because of certain developments in the Middle East, and therefore he has made efforts to bring the left-wing Zionist Union into a unity government. The sources said Netanyahu is keeping the foreign affairs portfolio for himself. There was some suggestion that he should have just made Yalon foreign minister and replaced him as defense minister. And he has replaced him as defense minister with Lieberman, a Russian Jew, very much an admirer of Vladimir Putin, I might add. But the sources said Netanyahu is keeping the foreign affairs portfolio for himself, not going to appoint a foreign minister right now, because he wants to personally handle the diplomatic challenges ahead, including a French initiative in the last few months of the tenure of U.S. President Barack Obama. Former Prime Minister Ehud Barak said on Friday the current governing coalition led by Netanyahu is exhibiting signs of fascism. Zionist leader, and there, we could say a lot about Barak and some of the issues with him. I mean, he was a war hero and that type of thing, but he's kind of slipped. Zionist Union leader Isaac Herzog accused Netanyahu of shifting sharply rightward. Netanyahu has made himself into a cabinet secretary of the extreme right of Avigdor, Naftali, Samorich, a combination of Lieberman, Education Minister Naftali Bennett, and Bayat Yehudi, member of Knesset Bezalel Smotrich. I'm not very good, by the way, with like French and Hebrew. My French teacher, I did take some French in high school, but she was a Jewish lady from Brooklyn, and so my pronunciations are a little bit off. But deal with it, okay? Anyway. So then Lieberman appointed as the defense minister, and then Yalon, he's now left the party. It's interesting, Foreign Policy noted 5 things you need to know about Israel's new Putin-loving defense minister. This is all very interesting from a geopolitics. I don't have time to go into it. But what's one thing that's interesting about him, according to Foreign Policy? He doesn't technically live in Israel. Lieberman lives in Nokdim, an Israeli settlement in the West Bank, making him perhaps the only defense minister in the world who doesn't live in the recognized borders of his own country. That's why Naftali Bennett's illegitimate, because he doesn't live in the borders of his own country. He lives up in the settlements. But look, this is the way the world thinks. Alan Dershowitz, who's a left-wing law professor, retired now at Harvard, I think he's professor emeritus, went to Europe recently. A visit to the old and new hells of Europe. My visit to Europe made one thing unmistakably clear. If there's any group in the world that needs a safe homeland, a sanctuary from bigotry and hatred, it is the Jewish people. But this push to divide the land and the push to delegitimize the Jewish people is a problem here in the United States as well. Caroline Glick, in her article, her editorial column on Friday, talked about this foreign policy seminar that was conducted called Advancing American Security. It was put on by the Koch brothers. They're libertarian is probably they're right wing, some people say, but they're libertarian mostly. And so they had this seminar, and to it they invited the guys who had written this book, The Israel Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy, John Maschmeyer and Stephen Walt. It was published about 10 years ago. So Caroline has some comments. I'll close with this and we can get out of here. The Koch brothers meet the crackpots. Here's what she says. Led by these two professors and a band of experts that Ruger assembled share but one common position. And to advance that position, they have advocated policies that stand in open contradiction of the very foreign policy doctrines on which they built their careers. The common position is hatred of Israel. All of them oppose the U.S. alliance with Israel and to varying degrees maintain the bigoted view that the Jews that support Israel have undue and malign influence on U.S. foreign policy. In other words, they are anti-Semites. As Professor Alan Dershowitz wrote at the time, when the book, The Israel Lobby, came out, their thesis, which they published as a best-selling book by the same name the following year, is a modern version of the anti-Semitic tome, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. In a seminal work, Warrant for Genocide, The Myth of the Jewish World Conspiracy, and The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, the late historian Norman Cohn demonstrated how the protocols built the pseudo-intellectual and psychological foundations of the Holocaust. In their updated version, Walt and Mearsheimer argued that through AIPAC and allied groups, Israel and the American Jewish community have taken control of U.S. foreign policy to advance their parochial and anti-American interests. In their view, it is anti-American to support Israel because Israel's very existence threatens global security generally and American security specifically. Moreover, the men who built their academic careers on their rejection of morality as a foreign policy rationale wrote that support for Israel is immoral because Israel has no moral right to exist. Now listen, I've talked about this before. I don't think a lot of people necessarily agree with me. I'm only putting it out there, but if you look at Ezekiel 35, 36, 37, 38, 39 as future prophecies, it does talk in Ezekiel 36 about a people. Also, thou son of man, prophesy unto the mountains of Israel. What are the mountains of Israel? That is Judea and Samaria, the biblical heartland. That was where Abraham sojourned when he was in the land of Canaan. Didn't go over to the coastal plain where most Israelis live now. He was in the mountains of Israel. Now today it's called the West Bank. So is the West Bank referenced anywhere in Bible prophecy? And I personally think that it is. It says this, and say ye mountains of Israel, hear the word of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord, because the enemy has said against you, aha, even the ancient high places are ours in possession. There is a people, I think the scripture is referring to, in the end times that will claim that they have the right to possession of the mountains of Israel. And my question is, do we live in a time where there are a people group that is claiming that they have a right to the possession of the mountains of Israel? Make up your own conclusion. Therefore prophesy and say, thus says the Lord God, because they have made you desolate and swallowed you up on every side, that ye might be a possession unto the residue of the heathen, and ye are taken up in the lips of talkers and are an infamy of the people. Therefore, ye mountains of Israel, hear the word of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord God to the mountains, and to the hills, and to the rivers, and to the valleys, to the cities that are forsaken, which became a prey and derision to the residue of the heathen that are round about. Thus saith the Lord God, surely in the fire of my jealousy have I spoken against the residue of the heathen and against all Idumea, the Edomites, Edom, which have appointed my land into their possession with the joy of all their heart, with spiteful minds to cast it out for prey. Go read the book of Obadiah, and it talks about, it uses the symbol of the eagle. Then go look up the Palestinian symbol. Guess what it is? It's an eagle. I personally think there's a very strong connection here, and I think that this all plays into this push to divide the land to make peace. Now, I don't think it's going to work. I know it's not going to work. I know this is ultimately going to end in the return of Jesus to defeat the armies of the world who've gathered against Jerusalem and the Jewish people. I know that. So I'm not supporting it, but I'm just telling you this. This is what I think the Bible is. And I think even a man who I think is pretty savvy and understands these issues is being pushed to the wall by the world powers to do this. Now, when it happens, is that the confirmation of the covenant that begins in 70? I mean, look, I don't think it's hard to lay out a prophetic scenario based on the current facts in the world that something like this could come about very, very soon. The world is having a peace conference about it in about 10 days. So, is that it? I don't know. I'm just saying is be on the watch. Because I think all these things are being put into place, and I think they're unfolding exactly like the plan says. So, time to go. So let's pray, and we'll pick up with this more next week. Father, as we always say, thank you so much for your prophetic word so that we can understand the troubling things that we see around us and know that this is all part of your perfect plan. And so, Lord, we pray like Daniel prayed, that when he saw that it was time for prophecy to be fulfilled, he prayed, well, a prayer of repentance and asked you to fulfill your prophecy just as it was written. And so, Lord, we pray for the same. We pray that you will draw us close to yourself, make us a holy people, committed to you and your word and the gospel of your Son, Jesus Christ, and give us the insight and wisdom that we'll need to understand and stand strong in times that will seem very troubling. Bless us as we go this week. In Jesus' name, amen.